I don't come here as an expert this morning. I come like the widow with a mite. I will share my portion of what the Lord has given me. I always wanted to be a servant of the Most High God. I couldn't think of anything that would be more exciting than to be a servant of the Most High God. I remember when I was working in my father's gas station, I was filling a man's tank with gasoline when I was a teenager, and he turned to me and he said, "Are you a Christian?" And I was a Presbyterian. I thought I was a Christian. I said, "I think so." He said, "Oh." And he paid me and he jumped in his car and he went off. But he had mentioned that he was going out to a lake nearby, to a camp there. And I got to thinking about that and I said, what did he mean? Am I a Christian? I better go check that out. And so I got someone to take care of the station, and I got in my car and I drove out there, and he'd already gone. I didn't know what it meant to be a Christian. When I went to college, I used to debate that. I was religious. I was active. I was a leader in the Presbyterian Center and on campus because I had an interest in religion. But it didn't work. It wasn't working. I had the honor and privilege of going to Beirut, Lebanon to study in my junior year in college. So I was away from home all year. And while you're away in a foreign land, quite often you think about things that you normally don't think about because you're kind of unhooked from the culture that you grew up in. And I began to ask the question, what am I for and who am I? It's a good question for a teenage kid. And, I said, I think I ought to check out this God thing because it might be important in my life. And I made a decision at that time to go to seminary. And so I finished up my degree at the University of Minnesota. Very broad degree in philosophy, history, humanities, and mathematics. And I went off to seminary, a Presbyterian seminary. It was the most conservative seminary the Presbyterians had in Dubuque, Iowa. And I found that seminary is not the place to check out the God thing. My professors, bless them, they were all very intellectual. They had degrees from all of the right places, and they were just guessing. And they didn't know, and I knew that they didn't know, and I knew I didn't know. And so after a full year, and I was a straight-A student in seminary because I loved Greek and Hebrew and mimeograph operation. Oh, many of you probably don't know what a mimeograph is, but way back then that was like a Xerox machine today. So after the first year, Trudy and I went to work for the National Council of Churches over the summer, working among the berry pickers, the migrant workers in the Seattle area. And while we were there, we kept hearing about this strange Episcopal priest out in Ballard. This was in 1962, at the height of the Pentecostal revival within the Episcopal and Methodist and Lutheran churches. And my uncle, who was an atheist, said, "You ought to go out there and check that out." He said, "You wouldn't want to get involved, of course, but you could write a really interesting paper on it in seminary." So Trudy and I went out, and here was a man that I knew. And by contrast, I was really clear I did not know. And I didn't go there to argue. He said, "Have you ever received Jesus?" I said, "No." Well, maybe. Who knows? He said, "Well, you go down and sit in the front pew down there, and one of my people will come." And one of his people came over and sat down, and she said, "Now, what do you want?" I said, "I don't know. What have you got?" Because I don't mean to put down Presbyterians. It's just that I had so little background in anything that I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. I couldn't even conjure up a good argument because I didn't know the world that he was coming from. But my purpose there was that night to do the process I didn't go to argue. And she said, just invite Jesus into your life. I did. She said, now just confess any sins that you might have. And sure enough, I remembered there were a couple. And so I confessed them, if kind of, God, if there is a God, forgive my sins if I have any, sort of prayer. It was not terribly fervent. And Dennis Bennett, who is the pastor of this church, author of 9 o'clock in the morning, for some of you who may know who he is, he said, oh, by the way, Will, when you're praying, be sure to get the power. He said, otherwise it's a real drag. He said, it's like having a brand new Cadillac and having to push it around all the time because you don't have any gasoline. So she said, now just invite the Spirit to empower you. And so I did. And she said, now if you'd like to, you can pray in a language you've never learned. And what? And I opened my mouth and I spoke in a language I had never learned. And it was an absolute zero emotional experience for me. I analyzed it like good engineers do. I said, oh, interesting, it's got sentence structure, there's a glottal stop. And I did that for a while, and I said, is that it? And she said, yep. And I said, oh. I was so disappointed. They told me that I was going to meet God Almighty himself that night. And I have been more excited at baseball games, and I don't like baseball. It was as exciting as tying your shoelace. That's about where it went. Now, my lovely wife, Trudy, she had a wonderful time. She had the same experience. She spoke in tongues. She was blessed and blessed and blessed. So this went on until about 2 o'clock in the morning. We got in our little Volkswagen and headed out to where we were going to go. And all of a sudden, the awesome sense of his presence. It's just like he had gotten into the car. And there was just the sense of God's presence in my life. I still feel it today. And the next morning when I got up, there it was. And I said, as a good engineer, I better check this out. And I tried this tongues thing, and it worked. And so began a wonderful, wonderful adventure. That adventure has been going on now for 42 years. And it's more exciting today than it was then. Now, as Presbyterians, we didn't know any better. So we just asked God questions and he answered them. And we started what we found was he wanted to show us himself. And so he was always doing things. This was in the World's Fair in Seattle in 1962. Virtually impossible to get a parking place. So when we would have to go to the headquarters of the National Council of Churches, we'd say, Lord, we need a parking place. And as we would be driving up, someone would pull out and we'd pull in. So the next week when we would need a parking place, we'd say, Lord, we could use 20 minutes on the meter. And there would be 20 minutes on the meter. And we just kept asking him questions, and I guess my impression at that time is that he loved to be our servant. But he was serving us because he wanted to show us himself, and he had a heart to show us who he was. And we began to fall in love with this lovely Lord, and we started meeting other Christians, and we began to learn what it was to walk a little bit in the Spirit. And then I went back to seminary, and it was even worse. My professors, I used to ask them pointed questions, but now I really ask them pointed questions. And since I was a straight-A student and intellectually acceptable to them, I became a troublemaker. And not because I wanted to make trouble, but because I wanted to know. And after my second year in seminary, I was invited to be the youth pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is a church of 3,100 members, a mink coat kind of church. It had already split once, and there was another church that was several thousand people down the street that was part of this congregation at one time. They had 9 kids in the senior high fellowship. 3,100 members, 9 kids. They had a travel-all, a big SUV. They had mountain climbing equipment. I had a budget of, consider in '63, this was $25,000. That's a lot of money. And it was entirely dead. The former youth pastor had been very liberal, and he had tried to entertain the kids. We said, Lord, we don't know how to do this. You know, we've never been a youth pastor before. And he said, I'll show you. Just keep the message simple. And he had me stand up in front of these kids and just simply say, you know, Jesus is alive. He's real. And if you'd like him to be real in your life, he will make himself real in your life too. And after a couple, 3 weeks, one of the gals, the leader of the group, went home, and she went into her bedroom, and she slammed the door, and she said, God, is what Will's saying true? And he met her right there. It was a powerful, powerful encounter, and he came into her life, and the next day she's walking down the hall in high school, and a friend comes up and said, Kathy, what happened to you? Kathy hadn't said a thing. Kathy said, oh, I have a new friend. And the other gal said, and it's obvious who he is. Well, the next week, Kathy came back, and she shared what it was like to meet the Most High God. And in 11 months, we could barely keep score. Those kids shared with each other, and 70 kids came to know the Lord in that one church. And the Lord gave me all kinds of other opportunities to share, and so that happened in several other churches. My seminary started getting letters very soon. Some parents were absolutely thrilled, and others were not thrilled at all. I had one elder stand on the steps of the church and yell at me in uncontrollable rage. What do you mean? My daughter received Jesus. She's been a Christian all her life. They sent a man out 3 times to Albuquerque from Dubuque, Iowa, to see what was going on. And they said, we've never seen a youth program like this before. It is absolutely wonderful, but do you have to make such a mess of things? Do you have to create such a problem? I said, I'm not creating a problem. I can hardly keep score. The young people are. In any case, the seminary wrote me a letter and said, in order to return, you must show proof of adequate and successful psychiatric therapy. They really didn't want me to leave. They wanted me to be under control. That was the point. And I knew it, and they knew it. But when I knelt in the small chapel there, and I said, Lord, what am I supposed to do? Now, I had walked already for a full year, and I knew his voice, and I could trust his voice. And when he said, I don't want you to go back to seminary, I said, okay, then what will I do, Lord? He said, I will teach you all things. I thought he meant about the Bible. It has to do with all of life, because all of our life belongs to him. So, for a period of time, Trudy and I were gainfully unemployed. That means that we have no visible means of support, only invisible means. We did some traveling. Perhaps some of you know Watchman Nee. Yes. Well, some of his co-workers had escaped just before the takeover. Watchman Nee had escaped, and then he went back, and then he was put in prison. But his co-workers were in Los Angeles, and we had the blessing of sitting under their ministry. And these brothers and sisters were having a conference in Los Angeles, and we decided that we would go. So we went out there. And after a week of teaching, and this was kind of an open-ended conference, it would last a couple months probably. The Lord, as I was walking in the morning from where we were staying to the meeting, the Lord said, now tomorrow you'll be leaving. I said, where am I going, Lord? And he said, declare yourself to the brethren, and then I'll tell you. So I went to Brother Lee and Brother Chang and some of the other leading brothers, and I said, now tomorrow I'll be leaving. And they said, you can't leave. I said, what does that mean? They said, the principle is God is doing something here and you must stay. I said, but do you have guidance from the Lord? Because I have guidance from the Lord. Do you have a word from the Lord that I'm not to leave? No, but the principle is that God is doing something here and you must stay. Well, not to be offensive, but I chose to be an obedient servant, and I have to walk that way. And so the next morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, knock, 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 Brother Chang and Brother Lee, brother, you must not leave. But do you have guidance from the Lord that I'm not to leave? No, but the principle is that God is doing something here, and you must stay. Well, Trudy and I blessed them and left, because I didn't know it then, but God had a terribly important appointment for me with an oyster farmer. And we journeyed, and we ended up in Quilcene on the Olympic Peninsula, way up north of Seattle. And there was an oyster farmer up there that lived way out on a dock out in the bay. And they would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they would pick oysters, and then when they were done, they would have the rest of the day. And this brother, as we were sitting around fellowshipping, said, Willis, have you ever given God irrevocable permission to do whatever he needs to do to change you into his likeness? Because that's the eternal purpose of God. That's what he wants in your life. I said, I never have. So we knelt down and we did that. And that was a stake in the ground in my life, so that God could always point to that. This is a commitment that I have made. You may do whatever you need to do to change this Swede, this engineering type person, into who you are. What an exciting thing that is. Sometimes it is painful, but it is exciting. I took a job at the University of New Mexico, and then I took a job as a sales engineer with no sales background and no engineering background, on direct commission with no draw. That was exciting too. But the Lord showed us his unfailing supply. And we learned that if we were a nickel short, he would supply the nickel for our rent. Always to the penny. And then I went to work in corporate America. The Lord showed me how to make some things that had never been made before. They're called inventions. And he would show them to me sometimes when I was getting in the shower. I'd say, what is that, Lord? And I wouldn't have enough background to even understand. I'd have to get my books down and go look. And I'd finally say, oh, that's what that is. But that led to work in corporate America. And so I spent 25 years ministering in corporate America. You cannot leave the ministry. You may get kicked out of seminary, but you can't leave the ministry. And so wherever we were, Lord would move us every 3-4 years. Actually, the corporations were moving us, but the Lord actually was moving us. He would say, son, now I have finished with you here. You may submit your resignation. And I would submit my resignation, and then I would go looking for another job. Usually people do it the other way around. They go look for another job, and then when they find one, they submit their resignation. But that wasn't the way the Lord had me operate. So we kept moving until we arrived in Boston after 25 years. And there I had a dream job with the second largest computer company in the world. I ran central engineering for them. Now understand that I don't have an engineering degree. I don't have an engineering background. I don't have any management degree. I don't have any management background. And I managed 1,600 people on a budget of $130 million. Only the Lord can do that. When Paul said, I boast in the Lord. I am boasting in the Lord. He showed me what I needed to know. He would anticipate what I needed to know. He would teach me what I needed to know. And I would be available with the information that was required and the insight and the understanding so I could manage that kind of thing. And one day in this dream job, I was having a staff meeting, and Ralph, one of my helpers, opened a white marker to mark on the whiteboard. He was going to illustrate something, and chemically I fell off a cliff. Something about the chemicals in the whiteboard marker triggered something in me, and I couldn't remember what the agenda was. And I had a really good memory. And then I couldn't remember their names. And then I could hardly remember my name. A week or so later, I had an appointment with my boss. And with my boss, it was a 3-hour meeting. So I went to the bathroom first. That's always good corporate policy. You go to the bathroom before you meet with your boss. And someone was smoking in the bathroom. And when I came out, I could barely move. And I could barely think. And the depression came down on me so heavily that I just sat down in front of my boss and I just started to cry and cry and cry. He was a godly man. He said, obviously there's a problem here, Will. We need to find out what it is and get it fixed. That was the last day I ever worked. 16 years, I was not able to work. I lived in isolation. I could not be in the presence of people with perfume, people who had smoked, people who had had their clothes cleaned. We decorated our house in Yard Sale Modern because it was outgassed. We couldn't buy anything new. I was allergic to everyone and everything. If I would be exposed to perfume for 3 or 4 minutes, I probably couldn't find my way home. More than once I had to call my wife and say, Trudy, I'm here somewhere, but I don't know where, and I don't know how to get home. I'll tell you what I see, and you come find me. But I tried to get out every day. I tried to keep an active life. So I was unemployed again, and I was essentially retired. 12 years into that isolation, the Lord spoke to me. Oh, He's been speaking to me regularly during those 12 years, but He spoke to me about my illness. I didn't badger Him. I didn't have any root of bitterness. I always went back to that oyster farmer. I said, if this is what it takes to change me into your likeness, then let's get on with it. Let's do what is necessary. I don't want to do this twice. Let's just do it once here. And the Lord said to me, I will heal you. That was kind of short, but I was hoping for a little more, but that's what I got. I will heal you. I wrote it down in engineering script, of course, and dated it and put it in my wallet. 2.5 years later, He spoke to me again about my illness, that is. And He said, I have tested the cake in the oven, and it is not yet finished. It must remain in a bit longer, soon, my son. Now, I don't think He was necessarily talking just about my illness. I think He was really talking about my life and about what He had purposed to do in my life during this period of time of my life. I knew that He had not made me ill. I knew that I had made me ill. I wasn't sure how and I wasn't sure why, but I knew that the lovely Lord that I knew did not make me ill. Every year, Trudy and I attempt to get away for a month. And so last year, we were up in a place in Maine. And the last week of that vacation time, the Lord spoke to me again. And He said, Now, my son, I will heal you. You do your part, and then I'll do mine. And I said, what is my part, Lord? And there was Henry Wright's book laying on the coffee table, A More Excellent Way. Someone had given that to Trudy before we had gone on vacation. And though I don't remember it, she tells me that we read some of that on the way to Maine. I said, Lord, is that something I'm supposed to do? Am I to go there? And he said, yes, I want you to go there. Now that's a very difficult thing for someone that is in isolation and essentially cannot be around people. You know, where do you stay? How do you do that? But I had purchased a little white camping trailer that had been fully outgassed a year and a half before then, and I said, that's what we'll do. I'll just get in that thing, and I will sleep alongside the road, and whatever it takes, I'm going to get there. So the next day, we were going to leave on Saturday. The next day, on Friday, as I was coming back from a little coffee, because I had found a place that I could get a cup of coffee without getting contaminated, my transmission failed. And we drove way down by the ocean, and it's pointing downhill, and the transmission is now locked and forward in overdrive. Well, I managed to get it turned around so I could back up the hill again. And I went in and I said, Trudy, today is the day. We're leaving. We need to pack up and get out of here because the transmission has failed. So we threw everything in the car, and I turned it and put it in gear, and every time I dropped it in gear, it would go, because it didn't want to go up the hill in overdrive. And I said, Lord, I'm going to need some help here. And he said, say it out loud, because I had said it to myself. And so as soon as I did, Trudy agreed with me, and I dropped it in gear, and it went, and we did get up the hill. And we prayed that there would be no traffic coming at the stop signs, because we went right on through them, because we couldn't get it started and stopped. We got home. I took it to my favorite transmission person. He had rebuilt this transmission 80,000 miles before. He took it all apart. He fixed it, put it back together again, gave it back to me, and the next day it failed. Same situation. The transmission simply failed. Took it back to him. He took it all apart. He rebuilt it again. He gave it back to me, and the transmission failed. Does this sound like the enemy to you? In any case, a day and a half after I had planned to leave, I was on the road. The transmission still did not work correctly, but it worked. And so I began a journey that was almost 900 miles, all by myself, in my little casita, my little travel trailer. And on the journey, I had a flat tire. I blew the bicep in my left muscle. I just reached around and it went pop. And so now I'm driving down the road with one arm that won't work, and the other arm would still work. And I was stopping at gas stations every 2 hours or 3 hours to fill up my tire. And I had just put gasoline in my tank, and I had a couple of 100 miles, and 23 miles later the Lord said, now I want you to get off the road here. So I took the exit, and you know how it is in the inner witness of the Spirit. I went down all of the little shopping places at that exit, trying to sense what it is that the Lord has here for me. Why am I doing this? And there was none. I got to the end where the houses started. I turned around, and the light came on that said, check your gauges. And as I did, it said, your engine is overheating. And this is Saturday afternoon, about 4 o'clock. And I don't remember whether it was the Lord that told me or whether I just simply remembered, but there was a Dodge dealer just where I turned off the highway. And I went back to the Dodge dealer, and lo and behold, he's open and he's fixing cars at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, yes, I can squeeze you in. And it turned out it was just a little electrical connection that hadn't been made, so the fan didn't work right. And they fixed it. And the cashier said, you know, it's really surprising. We just started this week repairing cars on Saturday. The Lord had already, before the problem, he had already put together the solution for me. So I finally got to Pleasant Valley. And Sunday evening was a worship service. There were 103 of us, and there were 100 of them. And we worshiped in a gymnasium that they had purchased. They purchased a whole high school. And it was so reminiscent of what we just experienced here this morning. Here were the saints of God just worshiping and praising God. And I just cried and cried. I tried to sing the songs, but in 16 years I had forgotten how funny the songs are, where you sing the top verse 3 times and you jump down 4 verses, and you sing that one and then you pop back up here again. I couldn't follow it, you know. But I gave it my try. But it was a wonderful, wonderful time of worship. The next morning was class. They give you an intake sheet where you write down what medications you're on, what your medical condition is, what your spiritual condition is, something about yourself. I had heard some people talking among themselves, and someone mentioned a broken heart. I didn't know what that was. Swedes are not terribly introspective. We don't really process. My daughter has said more than once, Dad, you need to get in touch with your emotions. You need to get in touch with your godly emotions. Well, I didn't know what a broken heart was, but I had such an awesome witness that over lunch, I couldn't even say those words. We were talking about, what do you think your situation is? I said, I think it's a... And I couldn't say it. I think it's a broken heart. I don't know what that is. But I think, and I wrote that down, it's a broken heart. I don't know what that is, but I think we ought to look at that. Monday it was lectures. That's what they do. They teach you a lot because they know that a lack of knowledge can kill you. And then they minister, and then they teach, and then they minister, and they teach and minister. Monday evening, they said, now we're going to minister to the broken heart. We're going to minister the Father's love. And they said, anyone that would like to receive that ministry, the ladies first, line up along the gym. But they said, we have a question for you. If it pertains to you, just raise your hand and keep it up and look. How many of you, this question is, how many of you, when you were children, during your growing up time, but while you were still a child, never heard your father say, I love you? 97% in that 103 people never had heard their father say, I love you. Broken hearts. I was one of them. I never heard my father say, I love you. Never heard my mother say that. I don't even remember being hugged by them. It wasn't that they were bad people. They were good people. It's just that that wasn't who they were. They had their own issues. The ministry of the Father's heart is an attempt to reconnect you with your Heavenly Father. And when they ministered the ministry of the Father's love, it was somewhat emotional. It was good. And they told me that during this ministry, God would reach down and he would touch that broken heart, and he would heal that broken heart, if I would give him permission to do so. I said, I want some of that. Whatever it is, I don't understand it, but whatever it is, that's what I want. The next day, Tuesday, more ministry, more teaching, more ministry. Each night we had homework. Homework consisted of a list of things that you needed to deal with in your own life, whether it was fear or envy or jealousy or bitterness or whatever it is. And it was a long list, and you sat before the Spirit of God and you said, Lord, which ones of these pertain to me for right now? And then you would pray about those things. As an engineering type person, I said, okay, these people have given me a hypothesis. They have said that what they are doing will affect my immune system, and I will be better. You see, they differentiate between the 1 Corinthians 12 type healing, which is a miraculous movement of the Spirit of God, a miraculous healing, and the immune system that God has created in us to keep us in health for 70 and with strength 80 years. God does not want to heal us. He wants us always to be in health. And he designed a system in us that is capable of keeping us in health for 80 years. And they explained this to me in more detail than I really wanted to know. But it was good because as an engineer I wanted to know about that. So on Wednesday morning I got up at my normal 4:30 in the morning, and I drove to Thomaston, which was a half hour away, and I went to Walmart. There was an all-night Walmart there, and I went walking in Walmart for an hour. I went right down the soap aisles. I went right through the chemistry. I said, isn't it interesting all the things they put in here since I was here last 16 years ago? That chemistry could not touch me. Could not touch me. And I went back to class that morning at 8:30, and I did all the class in the ministry and the class in the ministry and the class in the ministry. And I finished the week, and I went out to dinner to eat, and I did all of the things that you normally would do. And when I was finished, I went off to Florida to visit my son. And I arrived there, and my son said to me, "It's really good to see you, Dad. I have a corporate picnic tomorrow." Translated, we'll be leaving you, but we'll be back. And I said, I would really like to go along. He said, could you do that? I said, I think I can do that. So on the next morning, his wife, beautiful young lady, she put on all the perfume she always wears. And my son came out and said, which car should we take? Because normally that meant I follow you, because I have to be in my own car. I said, no, we'll go in your car. It's okay. So I got in the back seat, and Tanya, his wife, turned around and said, this is the first time that you have ever ridden in our car in our married life. I said, yeah, isn't it wonderful? So we got to the corporate picnic, and we did all the things that people do at corporate picnics. And I was surrounded by people with perfume, and it could not touch me. And after 2 or 3 hours, whatever it was, we got in the car and we came home again. And so we're sitting out in a lovely evening in Florida on the front lawn, and my daughter-in-law turned to me and she said, "You're not gray." She said, "In fact, you're pink. You're pink. You glow." I said, "Yes. Isn't it wonderful?" Is the sound person there? Sound person? I would like, if I may, with your permission, to play the message that was left on our answering machine at home after that. It's the voice of my son. If you'd just play that for me, please. Just the first couple, 3 minutes. Track 1. You've got it.
Hey, Mom, it's Chris. I just wanted to call you and tell you. I mean, Dad, he's been hanging out. He came into the house. He took a shower in the house. He left. I had a company picnic. He went to the company picnic. We sat inside for like 2 hours and played bingo. And he met tons of people. And then he took Jagger and we took our car there. So he was in the car with all of us. And then and then he took Jagger in our car to the dollar store. He hung out with Jagger at the dollar store for probably like 45 minutes. And he thought, he's just kicking butt. We're just unbelievably excited. I mean, he's still, he looks great. He feels great. He's talking. He's hanging out. He's not really showing that he's super excited, but you can tell he's super excited because, Dad doesn't, really like to show super excitedness. But, it's just great. And I just figured you should hear it because it's just, it is great. Things are just, it's happening.
I'm coming up on my first birthday of my healing. It was just a year ago. And my job description is to be a servant to the servants of God. I don't want to start a church. I don't want to start a group. How can I help? That's my heart. That's why I'm here today. And I trust that in the next couple of sessions, that the message that I have will be of help to you, and that it will be the beginning of even more, so that we can walk together and we can learn together.